Obviously, I'm an otaku. You want to switch to the next slide?
We're starting?
Yes.
129.
Oh. Okay, fine.
Give them one. Give them their 45 seconds to get in this room.
Okay, fine. I'll be kind. But yes, please take notes, please have questions, and don't be afraid. I might be overly extroverted, but that's actually not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not always a good thing either. And I'll talk about that during the panel too.
Am I able to have that card since I can't stay for the whole time?
Oh, absolutely. Please do.
No, you must stay for the entire panel.
I refuse.
I don't blame you. If I had to be around him for an entire hour, I would run away too. I live with you. That's the problem. I can't escape.
Yes, you're stuck. Or you can give me half of everything and I'll leave.
That's not happening. All righty.
See, it was worth waiting an extra 45 seconds.
I know. So I'm going to close the front door, and if people want to keep on coming in, they can, but I'll leave that back door open. You're more than welcome to stay, please. Be not afraid.
Be very afraid.
I don't bite strangers.
Very afraid.
So is your husband?
Probably, yes.
Do I what?
Bite strangers. He's kind of feral. That's why I leave him back here. To prove to you that I know what I'm talking about, I have been in human resources for 20 years. I have primarily spent those 20 years actually doing recruitment and hiring for practically every industry known to man, going from voice acting all the way to engineers to CEO and VPs. Like that says, I have hired for over 30 industries throughout the US. And this includes Hawaii, sadly not Alaska, because I'm not that cool apparently. So I know a lot of the hiring practices, not all of the individual laws, because they can vary state by state. But I know a lot of the hiring practices and requirements for most of the jobs, no matter what state it is. I know how to hire within diversity and inclusion. The reason I say that, and please let me know if I'm too close, my dear. The reason I say that, though, is because diversity and inclusion is one of those areas that has been hard to hire for. And technically, it's not hard. It's just one of those things that people have a hard time contemplating in their head. And this means anyone from the queer community. It means hiring minorities, or what they call BIPOCs. It means hiring women in male-dominated roles. So I have actually worked on a lot of projects through my organization to be able to look at those diversity measures to ensure that we're allowing everyone to be who they want to be and to find an opportunity within the organization, no matter how they identify, no matter who they are, and no matter what they look like. We want to make sure that we're open and honest with everyone, and I've been very successful with the last two organizations I've been a part of. I am a co-founder with my husband of Creativity by Design. We primarily work within various communities to educate through entertainment. So we try to make anything that we do fun, but also give everyone a chance to learn something new, no matter what it is. My philosophy for the last 40 years, is that I try to learn one new thing every day. And it doesn't matter how big or small it is, I try to learn something new so I can pass it on to other people. I have been an otaku since 1994 because I am super old. The reason I say that is because my first anime that I knowingly knew was anime was Sailor Moon when it aired in 1994 on television because I was in high school. So that shows how old I am. Now, that's in the United States, because I'm not cool enough to go to Japan. So if you want to go to the next slide. So everybody thinks that there's an issue being introverted within the workplace. Because if you're introverted, you can't get a job. If you're introverted, nobody's going to want to talk to you because you're so quiet. In philosophy, introverts can take charge. Many of the leaders that I have supported or I have worked alongside successfully have all been introverts. They have been very cautious, they have been very reserved, but they always know how to make the most of any situation. And that's why I have Armin up here, because he's a perfect example of an introvert from Attack on Titan who has definitely taken the opportunity to develop those plans and implement those plans. So even if you're an introvert, never be afraid, because you are the one who's going to make everything work. Have faith in yourself. The next slide I want to showcase real quick before we really get into any questions.
Those in the back.
I asked before, but can everybody in the back still hear me? Yay! That shows my New York tendencies are working and I yell. All right, so extroverts show compassion. Most time when people are around extroverts, they're loud, they're aggressive, they are like rude, and truthfully those are qualities that many extroverts have. Sadly, I'm one of them. But we also can be very compassionate. So that's the one thing that you have to be aware of as an introvert working with an extrovert. They may not seem like they're connecting with you, but they can be very compassionate and aware of the situation, even if they're seeming loud and obnoxious. The reason why I put these two slides here when looking for a job is because you have to just breathe and be aware that you don't know who is sitting next to you. He is actually an introvert. He doesn't act like it, but he is. Where obviously, I don't think anybody can deny I'm an extrovert. And I had to be very aware of that when we first started dating, because he wouldn't talk to me and I'm like, okay, what do we do? And that's how it is in the employment workforce, is that when you interview either as an introvert or as an extrovert, you let your qualities dictate what you're going to do. Anybody who, and I know I'm going to be putting people on the spot, how many of you in this room are introverts? Be honest. Perfect. How many of you introverts are careful or comfortable talking with strangers? Wow. How many of you introverts have issues during interviews? And I'm actually surprised not to see more hands up, so that is awesome for all of you introverts who are comfortable, because most introverts tend to have social anxiety. How many in this room are extroverts? How many of you extroverts are uncomfortable talking in public? Look at those hands for all of the extroverts that raise their hands. They're uncomfortable talking in public. It is one of those dynamics that you'd be amazed with, because most people think extroverts can walk into a room and own it. And the reason I share that is because I wanted to prove point and concept that introverts and extroverts are all the same. The only thing is some people are a little bit more comfortable with certain things no matter what they do. Like one of our really good friends, his name is Silverquill, if you like the Brony community. He is by far the biggest introvert in the world. He would not talk to me for the first 3 years. And now he can...
Not really 3 years.
I'm being obnoxious, but honestly, he can own a room, and he's the biggest introvert in the known universe. He does not like talking to people. Because introverts, and this is what I want to empower you on, you're great at hiding the fact that you're an introvert. And if you don't know how to do that, it's going to sound crazy, but when you're prepping for an interview, talk to a mirror. You are your own worst critic. So if you're ever prepping to speak in front of public, if you're ever prepping to go into an interview, talk in front of the mirror. You'd be amazed at how well you can connect when you're just facing yourself, because you know what you're willing to say and what you're willing to do. Before we move on, any questions at all? Yes?
What would you say would be the case for people who are kind of in between?
That's kind of technically, I call it introverted extrovert.
There are people who are in between. And that's the one thing that is wrong with those personalities tests, because they really don't identify people who are one way or another. You either are on this ridiculous spectrum of being an introvert or being an extrovert. In those types of situations, I would hedge on what you typically are more aligned to. Like, for example, personal situations, sometimes those people who hedge on those two areas, personally, they could be more extroverted, but the moment they go into a professional environment, they're like super introverted because you have to play that game. And as nerds, or otaku, or however you identify in that geeky community,
Awesome.
we are awesome, yes. But we sometimes have to play that, I jokingly call it multiple personalities. You have to have your regular personality because most people don't share what they enjoy to do at work because nobody's gonna understand it. And I can guarantee you, in the last 20 years, only 2 to 3 of my coworkers actually know what I do. Yes?
And I actually have some very different maps than different situations. And
Yes.
sometimes I think the part for the root word of personality comes from the word for map.
Well, it's a persona, so yes. So it is very true like that. Any other questions? Yes.
So, when I go in for an interview, what happens is I'm not used to like the boss dynamic. I'm used to a more casual dynamic. So my filter freezes my brain because I want to make sure I'm not saying anything bad, and that's why I stutter and start getting nervous because I keep freezing. My brain keeps freezing what I'm trying to say because I don't know if it's appropriate. So how do you get practice, like getting used to that dynamic and being comfortable talking to them?
So this is a good question. I'm going to just repeat it for the group just so they hear it. So I actually have a stutter. I've worked very hard to prevent it because I am always fearful of being laughed at. And I think that's a fear a lot of people have. But the question is, if you go into an interview and you freeze, which happens to everyone, and you're scared that you're not going to say anything appropriate or you're going to make a mistake, the one rule I have for everyone who goes into an interview is have a notebook and write talking points that you want to remember in your notebook. Because that way you can always look down at your notebook because every interviewer always says, have questions. What questions do you have for us? You can actually use that notebook to also put talking points, like if you saw in the job description that they want A, B, and C, you can write down things like that in your notebook so you can train your minds to go back to that. That's my recommendation because it has worked for me, because nerves in an interview are 100% there. Nobody can ever, even if you say I don't walk into an interview nervous, I can guarantee you are nervous, you're just not recognizing it. But if you have talking points or you just feel comfortable with those talking points, I recommend having them written. That's going to focus you. Because everybody's fear is, what do I do if I go into that interview and I forget everything? So that's kind of what I have always done, and that's why I try to train him on when he goes into interviews, or anyone, is just have something at the ready that you can speak on so you can be like that right away. Because you can practice all you want, but you're going to go back to that fear unless you have something. And I just have one notebook that I'll buy at like Target when they have like the back to school sales for like 25 cents. And I will just keep all of my interview notes in that notebook so that if I ever need to, when I'm prepping for an interview, I can go back to what I've said in the past as well. So it's like a nice little cheat sheet to have at the same time. Does that help? Perfect. So any other questions before we move on? All right, go ahead. So I want to start with one thing before we get this out there. A lot of times when I first started these panels, everybody thought I was talking about voice acting. Honestly, a lot of the qualities here that you have for voice acting can be relevant for everything else. So I just want to get this out of the bag that if you want a voice acting job, I would talk to a professional. Why I'm hired for them, it's not my gig. So definitely, no matter what you're doing, be comfortable with rejection. Don't look at any rejection, be it for any role. I'm using this just because it helps. Is if you go in for an interview, let's say you apply to 50 jobs, get 3 interviews, because in reality, that does happen.
Or 486.
Yes. And what I would do is don't take any rejection as they don't like you. That is probably not the case. It is just sometimes that it wasn't a match. Look at it as a learning opportunity. I would always ask, if you don't get selected for a position, why? Even if they give you a canned answer, I would take that canned answer. Same thing is, well, I'm going to ignore the theater unless you want it. Have a backup plan. If you're trying to look for another type of job, have a backup plan of what you want to do. So go ahead and go to the next slide real quick.
Be patient. I'll get there.
All right. How many people have a social media account of some sort? And don't be afraid to say anything. How many people have Facebook? How many people post whatever the hell they want on Facebook, damn the consequences? How many people use their real name on any of their social media? You want to know something? It's public record, and I have terminated more than 50 people in my career for what they post on social media. Drinking, drugs, shit-talking their employers. If you're going to post on social media and you want to be free to say whatever you want, whenever you want, do not use your own name. Go by an alias. I actually have not used for any of my social media except for LinkedIn my real name in about 20 years. Because knowing that I've had to terminate people for it, it is definitely something that will bite you in the behind. And if you're like my lovely husband here who loves to troll people for the lulz, you definitely don't want to use your real name. And if you're going to use your real name, I'm not saying that you lock it up tight and you don't post anything, but just be conscious of what you post and make sure that if you're going to post publicly, that's probably PG-13 and it doesn't go on this like whole rant about anti-world type things, because they're very, very cautious of that. And in all honesty, most employers are looking at their employees' social media as like a way of representing them. So even if you don't talk about your work, if you're employed with a certain company or if you're looking at a job with a certain company, you're representing that certain company when you're employed. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it does happen. The other alternative is turn your settings on private. If you're going to post, make sure you do it privately that only your friends see, your friends and family. Now, obviously, if you're looking at getting a job that is like super uber cool and has a security clearance, the government's going to get into your account anyways. But be sure to keep it private and be your authentic self. If you want to post what you want. I keep myself open and honest with anything I post, but I also know, last line, I'm not going to be an asshole. Excuse my language for saying it, but I'm going to be honest about it. I try to protect myself and my reputation because I use my social media to promote different jobs that I have. So if I have something available, I'm going to give it to the world because I want people to come work for me. And if I look like an idiot online, nobody's going to want to work for me. It's the same thing for yourselves. If you look foolish, employers are going to be a little bit more hesitant of what you have out there. Any questions about that? Yes.
I heard it's also the opposite, right? Because employers look at you as representing the company, if you leak something that the company doesn't want you to say,
Yep.
For example, we're going to release this really great anime next month because we finally got a license for it, and the company's like, oh no, we're not ready to tell everybody.
That's exactly it, because even before you work for a company, they want to see that you're going to be respectable, responsible, and just good human beings.
And most employers these days, the first thing they do after you've applied is they look up your name online. They'll just go type into Google, see what comes up.
Well, not after you apply. You have
Well,
to get to the next steps first. I'll go over that after. Yes, what's your question?
How far would one look back for that? Because, like, I know I wrote some cringy things when I was, like, 10 on Facebook.
Think about James Gunn. So if somebody really wants to, and like I said, if you're going for a government job, I can guarantee you, they really want to. So I wouldn't, in the past is the past. More often than not, most companies are not going to look back that far because the amount of time it takes to go through all of your social media is daunting. Now there are some states, and I don't know if you're all local to Oregon, so please forgive me if you're not, if you are, but there are some states where it's technically illegal. Just because it's illegal doesn't mean companies won't do it. They just won't tell you. And unfortunately, unlike LinkedIn, there's no tracker to say somebody's been searching your profile. You had a question?
It was more of a comment.
Okay, certainly.
Yeah, I had to explain this to my friend in high school once, but also, like, your beliefs being public can hurt you too. Like, because one of our teachers was on TV and a while back and said some political stuff on TV, and the teacher got in trouble for that. And my friends didn't understand, and I had to explain to them that the school had an image of neutrality, and that a teacher had to have an image of neutrality because they were teaching the students.
Yes, and that's a really good point. If you are in a situation where you are, like even for myself, I guide people and I'm responsible for having like a fair and open perspective, you can't necessarily sway one way or another on politics, on religion, on the gender, sexuality normatives. I focus solely on the positives of those, but if I claim I choose a side, as much as I don't want to hire homophobes or assholes or anything like that, they're there and I have to be conscientious of both sides even though I don't like it. So it's definitely playing that political game as much as you don't want to. And you had a question, my dear?
Back when you asked people to put up the anti out of Facebook, I didn't because I legitimately do not have a Facebook account.
And that is certainly fine. The reason I asked that is because Facebook is the most common. Twitter is obviously a hellhole of terrible posts, and most people generally don't post there unless they really hate themselves.
Basically, posting on the internet is a declaration of war.
Yes, that's why I have these memes here.
Don't be fighting for us.
So go ahead into the next slide.
So the reason I asked is because I've heard that some employers view not having a Facebook as a red flag.
No, not at all. There's quite a few people who don't have any social media at all, and honestly, that's the safest bet if you can get away with it.
And if for some reason they are requiring it, then they're probably not a good employer to work for.
So before I get into job hunting, the last thing I want to focus on is education. So education, depending on what your degree is, can be as worth it as the piece of paper it's written on. If you're looking to go into a specific field, getting a history degree, getting a literature degree, an English degree, like teaching, definitely is great. Getting a fine arts degree because you like to draw, please don't. Nobody hires a fine arts degree. Ask him.
Well, no, use the springboard for masters, done that.
Yeah, that's adorable. Get a degree that means anything. And the reason I say that is because very few people get a good job with having those degrees unless they have a lot of experience. And that's because America is a backwards country. We value education, but we don't value the type of education you get. And America right now is definitely focused on technology, engineering, or anything that's the betterment of the Fortune 500 companies. As much as I hate to say it, that is reality. If you get a degree in video game design, trust me, you can get picked up quick by most Fortune 500 companies because there is a need for game designers to actually work, like with my company, I work with Lockheed Martin, we actually hire game designers to build a lot of the specs that shoot things in space. So there's a lot of potential there. But if you have just a graphics design degree, then you want to have a hell of a portfolio to get into those organizations. So be conscientious of your degree because you want to make sure that you're getting something that's actually going to be valuable the moment you graduate. And sadly, child from the 90s here, both of us have had the experience of not having that luxury because we were told, go to college. You'll get a job after you graduate college no matter what degree you get. And that's a lie. So next.
Then there's also we want someone with 10 years of experience, or no, they want 20 years experience, but they have to be 10 years old. Oh, so you want to ask Petra?
Pretty much. Go ahead and to the next slide. So this is where I talked about gamification. I won't go too far into this because I want to get to resume writing. But gamification can also work for resume writing and job interviews. Think of it as a way of putting yourself out there and doing a risk reward for it. So if you go into an interview, you can use this as like a learning experience, putting your skills out there, and what kind of achievement you can give to yourself afterwards. Like last week, I actually had a candidate interview with 3 different managers, and we even talked about it. He used it as like a Tetris game. How can he put those building blocks to get that straight line? So gamification is a great concept to build a strategy to help get yourself that job. Any questions? Any thoughts? Yes?
If you suck at strategy.
I suck at strategy?
No, I said, what if I suck at strategy?
So there's this really great philosophy that I learned. It's called fake it until you make it. So truthfully, I suck at most strategy games, but I look at it as strategy does not have to be very elaborate. How many people have heard of the scientific method? So scientific method, I don't have it on the screen. I can't remember all of the qualities because I suck as a human being, but I actually use that. So basically the first thing is come up with a problem. The problem is, how do I get this job? Basically the hypothesis would be then, what do you need to get this job? So you look at the qualities, and then the third is, what do you need to succeed? Everyone who has the opportunity, look up the scientific method. It's a great way, if you're not great at strategic thinking, to actually trick yourself in the strategic thinking. The other thing that I recommend is what's called a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That is another way of boxing up your skills, because the one question you will always hear in the interview are, what are your greatest weaknesses? This way you can actually consciously think about it without having to go too far out of your comfort zone. Go ahead and go to...
So also, like for another example of gamification, we have another friend.
I already explained that, so I did that early. You failed.
About Elizabeth?
Yes.
Oh.
That she uses Yakuza to answer phone calls.
Well, that, and she just says because she's an executive assistant, her entire job is just one giant fetch quest after another.
Good. Next slide.
Oh, you.
I needed to steal your thunder. Resume writing. I love this joke. I thought your resume was a joke, Mr. Higgins, but I can't find the punchline, which is why I called you back here. Resumes are the hardest thing to write. Who likes writing resumes? I am so happy that nobody raised their hand, because the last time I did this, I had like 3 people raise their hands. I'm like, all right, you need to get a job as a resume writer because apparently you're insane. Who has used a paid resume writing service? Was it worth it? That response is all I needed to know. Yes?
What a call college department count as paid?
All right, can I share a lovely story?
Yes.
I hate college department resume writing services because they are terrible. They give the greatest recommendations in the world. And when I get the resumes, I was like, who wrote your resume? Oh, my college team. Yeah, they don't do what I do every day. So, with resume writing, this is definitely the part that you want to take some notes in. First thing with resume writing is going to be have an objective statement at the top. It must say what you're looking for and what you can bring to the table. Such as, actually, let me see if I can bring up my resume.
Do we have internet access? Or?
No, I have it on the computer. Please forgive me. I figure having an example would be better than not. And why is that there? All right. So, can everybody see this? I'll have you scroll down as we go along. So this is my resume. As you can see, I do not have the state of where I live, or I don't have my full address. You don't need to have that. I recommend having your city and state, your phone number, especially if you're looking for something out of state, a LinkedIn account. If you don't have one, I recommend creating it because it is Facebook/Twitter for professionals, and then your email address. I have a title of what I'm looking for, so Human Resources and Office Manager. I have my objective statement up here that says what I want to do, what I can do, and what my technical proficiencies are. I also have up here, which I always like and recommend, a basic summary of the different skills you know. And it doesn't have to be fancy. It can be like customer service. It can be anything across the board. Scroll down a little bit. So this is definitely outdated because I forgot to pull up the right one. But here, I then put the name of the company, city and state, and the job title. I know I'm telling everybody something they've already seen on resumes. I recommend always having about like 3 sentences that are not bullet pointed. These are the sentences you want to highlight the most. Like I have here, I manage all the customer service operations. So I highlight what all of those are. One thing that you can do for any job when you're trying to create a resume is write out everything that you've done. Not on your resume, on a sheet of paper or on your computer, whichever you feel comfortable with. Write out everything that you've done. Doesn't matter how infantile, how unnecessary it is. Keep track of all the things that you've done because it is going to be necessary when you write a great resume. The other reason I say it is because you'd be amazed at the type of things that you overlook as a person that are going to be valuable to an employer because those are what we call transferable skills. So common sense is not a natural occurring thing any longer. Common sense has to actually be something that people have to think about. So every company says all the transferable skills that they want. Most commonly, those transferable skills are office administration or technical writing is not actually technology. Technical writing means that you know how to write really well and you could be coherent and conscientious of what needs to be provided. So customer service. Even if you hate talking to people, I can guarantee you every single person in this room has done customer service of some support, of some element, either talking to people on phones, writing to people via email, organizing any kind of paperwork that has to be funneled to another human being. Anything like that is considered customer service.
Or explaining to your mom why she's trying to take a beautiful picture and all I see is her thumbprint.
Yes. Anything is customer service. Yes.
Would role-playing as a bartender on Final Fantasy XIV count?
Yes, actually it would. It's a transferable. Now, how you state it is the key. So, go up.
Up?
Or down. Down. The other direction. This is why you don't get married.
This one?
Yes. So this is a perfect example. I know I've sworn before and I do apologize. Can I swear to be honest with everyone? Okay. Have you ever heard the term baffle them with bullshit?
Yes. Yes.
That is how resume writing works. This job here, I was a glorified receptionist. I made it look like, well, not fully, but for the elements, I really was. I made it look like the prettiest damn thing in the world. That is how you successfully write a resume. You have to take what you've done, like here, oversaw all staffing management for 200 plus employees. Basically, I always make the joke, I was a legal pimp. I sent people out, they did a job, I got paid for it. How do I write that in a resume where people are like, huh, she's qualified to do something? I wrote it the most flowery way possible. Yes?
So one thing that always freaks me out when I get to this stage of the resume writing is turning it into something that is too flowery to the point where I feel like I'm lying to people, because I'm very uncomfortable with the idea that I am exaggerating anything and that anything I might say is a lie.
No, and this is a fair comment. So her concern, I
Yes,
apologize.
correct.
Okay, thank you. I don't see all the badges, so I can't see gender.
You are correct.
Okay. So the comment was that you always feel fearful of putting too flowery of words that you're almost to the element of lying. Guess what? All resumes are a lie. Every single resume. Because, and yes, you put the qualities that you know. Don't get me wrong. You're going to put things that you know how to do. But the presentation is looking more advanced. Obviously, if you truly don't know how to do something, or if you did it for like a half a day, don't put it on your resume, because that is a bold-faced lie. But resumes are kind of like white lies. You know how the white lies that we tell our children sometimes to, or that we were told as children, like the tooth fairy and things like that? That's kind of what a resume is. So you want to be very conscious of it, but it really is making something really pretty, but is kind of being fake at the same time. Sometimes when I've written resumes for other people, I've wanted to vomit because I'm like, okay, I know this is so much prettier than what it is in reality. But you want to catch the eye of the employer. How long does it take for a manager to review a resume? Does anybody have a guess? Yes.
30 seconds to a minute.
Any other guesses? Yes.
A handful of seconds.
Yes, it takes 15 seconds to look at a resume to decide if you're going to continue. So, yes.
What about the trick question, which is like fractions of a second, because humans didn't read it?
I can guarantee you.
Yeah.
We don't, like the last job, I currently have a job where I've received 780 resumes. That's a lot of candidates. It's hard to read 780 resumes, but I definitely want to give everybody a fair shot. The first thing every employer looks at is the format of your resume. If your resume is formatted in a consistent manner, where you either have education on top, education on bottom, you have your employment history going down where the most recent is first and then it progresses down from there. That's what employers are going to look for. You want to know another thing employers are going to look for? What's called job hopping. Does anybody know what job hopping means? What does it mean, my friend?
Job hopping means it's like you go to a job for less than a year and you go to a new job and you do it consistently. It's not like you go to one job and it didn't work out, so you go to another job and you stay there. It's like you consistently keep jumping jobs.
Yes. If you leave a job less than 1 year and go to another job and stay there less than 1 year and go to another job and stay there less than 1 year, or even a year, most employers are going to look at it negatively. And it's almost like a death sentence on a resume. Because most employers are afraid of hiring people, even if they expect them to only stay for 1 year, they are afraid of hiring people that are going to leave short notice. Because does anybody know how long it takes to train for a new job? Mm-hmm.
So I used to work at Domino's, and we lost a lot of staff, and so we had a bunch of new staffing like, constantly. And some people, it took over 3 months before they got to a reasonable time, but generally it was 2 to 3 weeks.
Normally, it can take 6 months to fully learn a new job. And it costs 1.5 years of that person's salary. So if I hire someone, I am paying at the start 1.5 years of their salary. So I want to get, obviously, reimbursed on my investment. And that's what employers look for. So I recommend sometimes grinning and bearing it to get that experience. Now, obviously, if you are in a very hostile work environment, do not stay there because that is not safe for your mental health or your own personal safety, because I've been in those environments as well. Let's go back to the presentation.
And then we go there, and then there, and then there.
So let's go to the next slide. Well, before I could go on, yes?
Quick question. So how long do you recommend staying with the job?
At least 2 years. Now, generationally, and this is going to sound silly to say, boomers, which frustrate most people, and I understand, have been known to stay at their job for at least 15 to 20 years. Gen Xers, about 10 years. Geriatric millennials, so anybody born in the 80s, which sadly I am, they tend...
Millennial here.
So typically, they tend to stay with jobs about 3 to 5 years. Younger millennials and Gen Xers are...
Gen Zers?
Gen Zers, yes. They are typically staying with jobs for at least a year. And that is definitely throwing off a lot of the market's placements to understanding what keeps people and what makes people move on. But the sweet spot is about 2 years. Just because that way you can demonstrate, for lack of a better way of putting it, loyalty. So any other questions about resume writing? Because I definitely can answer them after the panel too. Yes?
It's just sort of a quick one. When employers are looking for job hopping in a resume, if they see that somebody's like a fresh college grad and that most of their jobs
That's
are
different.
year. Okay, it's good.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, and that's a good differentiation. If you just graduated college, job hopping doesn't mean anything because most people work for the summer, which I'm jealous of you because I had to work all throughout college. But job hopping during college is not frowned upon because there's a lot of people who don't work during college either because they can't balance the two. So don't worry about that. It's post-college. Oh, yes, your question first?
Yeah, I was actually wondering, what if you don't really have any experience at all? What do you do on a resume? Like you're just starting out.
So that's a great question as well. If you have no experience because you're starting out, think of the projects that you did in college, any of your group projects, any of your internships, anything that you did that took a length of time, because I know there's a lot of capstone classes that you have to take, a lot of semester-long projects that you've had to do. Those you can also write in the same resume formats for that, and you can actually use those. You can do it in high school, you can do it in college. I would not do it for high school if you're 5 to 10 years post high school, because that's not going to be as relevant anymore as college. And so don't think if you don't have any experience that you don't have anything to show for it. You definitely have your college experience. So don't negate that.
Yeah, example. My first resume, I actually set up a booth at a con. Back then I was selling Xerox pamphlets. I call myself a startup CEO for 9 years.
Actually, that's a good point. Let me just answer this question. Let me just talk about this real quick and I'll get to your question, my friend. How many people have hosted panels or volunteered at cons? That's job experience. You can definitely use anything that you have done at a convention, no matter what it is, and actually use the experience. I actually have it on my LinkedIn page. Every single con that I have done panels at, I have it listed out, and then I talk about what I've done. So if you ever feel comfortable, volunteer at a convention. It is great experience because you are dealing with customer service, you're dealing with problem solving, you are dealing with stress management. Even if it's your own personal stress, you're dealing with stress management. So definitely not be afraid and put yourself out there. Use school experience, use your experience with your conventions. If you host a panel, definitely use that experience because you've done public speaking. You have actually, once again, done customer service. You have done any administrative work, like office administration. Because
panel educational.
Yeah, and trust me, employers like seeing that because one thing employers like is that giving back to the community. I use quotations because they fail at it, but they like to see people doing it because it's free advertisement for them. So definitely do that. And what's your question first?
Page count and like length of resumes.
Great question. If your resume goes more than 1 page, if you have less than 5 years experience, no go. It should only be 1 page. Now, if you go into closer to 10 years of experience, 2 pages is fine, but the ideal sweet spot is always 1 page. And that's because, like I said, most employers are not going to look at a resume for that long initially. We do what's called a sweep. So we first review all the resumes and negate the people that just don't appear to have what we're looking for. They have like 10 pages of resume. We don't have time for that. We do that sweep. Then is when we actually spend 30 seconds to a minute or even up to 10 minutes at times. If the resume is really good, I will spend time dissecting it because I am the first step. So human resources is the first step in any organization resume review. You have to succeed past us to move to the second step of the hiring manager. And we are your advocates. So please be kind to human resources because we bring no value to the company. We really don't. We're the first ones to get laid off. So we defend you. If we see a resume that we like, any good human resources person worth their salt is going to promote you to every manager. You may have applied for one position, like this person has really good skills that would work for this position. We are the ones that play let's make a deal and get you in front of as many managers as we can think of. So that's a very common tactic. Another thing, if you're trying to build experience for your resume, go to a staffing agency. Even if you don't get long-term jobs, it's a great way to build experience because yes, it could be that fictional job hopping, but most people look at staffing agencies as a gateway because you never know what you can find. I actually started as a contractor for my current job because I worked myself out of a job previously, and I worked as a contractor and I was hired. So there's always that possibility as well. Any other questions on resumes? Yes?
Is there any good way to explain gaps in employment history?
So if the gap is for more than a year, my recommendation is to, like, what did you do in that year? Did you do any kind of like side hustle? Like post a video on YouTube, help somebody with, think of something, because most people will usually use gaps in employment, especially if they've cared for a loved one, because you can turn that into a transferable skill as well. But if you have gaps in your employment for longer than a year, I would think about the things that you've done during that period of time that can benefit you in that new opportunity. Because anything can be turned into gold, you just have to be comfortable with it. Okay, any other questions? Yes?
I'm just curious, when you're listing out your work history or experience, what about volunteer work? Like if you're working at a con, do you list that right alongside, say, working at a paid career job?
No, I would list volunteer work in a separate category. So I would do employment and then volunteer. And if you have a lot more volunteer than work experience, it's depending on what you're applying for, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Just make it as robust as you would work experience. Any other questions? So real quick, before we finish up, I want to talk about job interviews. So there's certain things that you never want to say during a job interview. I love this one. I got an expensive hobby, so I wanted to make more money. We all, as anime fans, have super expensive hobbies. I have in our home an entire room dedicated to his expensive hobby. It's called figures. So
I thought it was called detox with figures in them.
it's called that you need to stop.
It's called plastic crack.
Exactly. We all have expensive hobbies if we're a fan of anything. So the one rule of thumb going into an interview is please don't talk money. Obviously, you don't want to be slave labor. You don't want to make $10 an hour. You don't want to make something that's either well below your worth or well below what you can make to live on a daily basis. That would be foolish. Nobody would want to do that. But if you have no experience, as I've experienced this week, please don't ask for $90,000 a year if you have never worked a day in your life, because it's adorable. But in all honesty, don't talk about money, because depending on what you're asking for will scare an employer away. And don't put money on your resume. Actually, before I forget, don't put your picture on your resume. Do not put your date of birth on your resume. And for the life of me, don't put your social security number on your resume.
Well, unless you're applying for a job.
No, never.
Yeah,
In the United States, do not do any of that. Please, I beg of you. If you're going to give me your social security number, just give me your credit card and I'll go on a shopping spree. I might as well make it good for something. Yes, my dear.
How many times has this happened to you personally?
Enough that I have to say it. Every single one of them. The reason I don't say obviously your social security number should be completely obvious. But your date of birth can actually age you out. Now, let's say you're of my age, which I was born in 1980, so you can do the math and figure it out, because I pretend I'm 27. With that, I'm aging myself out of most jobs, because I'm an older individual, and I have more experience that they don't want to pay me because they're scared of me. Because they're scared I will leave because I'm closer to retiring than somebody who's 20.
What's retirement?
Something that'll never exist for any of us. Never say in an interview, I'm inexperienced. Please, for the life of me, pretend. Don't have to lie, just pretend you got it. Just be comfortable, be you, and if you're scared to death, like I said early on, have a notebook. Write down what your strengths are, write down what you're good at. Be proud of yourself, because at the end of the day, if you've made it to the interview phase, the human resources team has liked you. The hiring manager has liked you. Everybody else who has seen your resume has liked you. That means they like you. And the last step is just being happy and being confident, because if you want to think of it this way, you're interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing you. So I can guarantee you they're just as nervous because they like you already on paper. What if you don't like them? I've actually had that happen, where somebody interviewed 5 times and they inevitably said, you know what, I'm just not interested in this position. And the manager's like, son of a bitch, I really wanted that. That can happen. So just think about it. You have as much power as any interviewer. So never be afraid, because in all honesty, I never want to picture them naked, but I picture them crying. And that makes me happy at the end of the day. Go to the next slide real quick. This is my favorite thing because I love hell of a boss. This says, just in case you can't see in the back, be yourself. People don't have to like you and you don't have to care. I have learned over 20 years, most of my coworkers don't like me because I come across aggressive, and if I don't like what they're doing and it violates human rights or employment laws, I tell them. I am not afraid to do so. They don't like me because I'll get them in trouble if I think they're doing something wrong. At the same time, nobody has to like you. The only person who has to like you in the vein of RuPaul is yourself. If you can't love yourself, how in the hell is anybody else going to love you? So the only person that has to care at the end of the day of what you do is you. Even if you're in a committed relationship, I don't care if he's happy with the shit I do. I just have to be happy with it. Obviously, he just wants the paycheck. And not really, that sounds terrible, but it's true. But anyways, you have to like yourself. And that's the most important thing for an otaku when looking for a job, is you have to care about yourself, you have to like yourself, and you have to be comfortable with what you do. It is a scary thing. I've applied for hundreds, if not thousands of jobs over the years. And every time I get the interview, I'm like super excited. And then I don't get the call and I'm like, oh, why didn't they like me? What did I do wrong? And then I thought about it, I'm like, you know what? That's fine. There's gonna be another job out there. And typically there has been. If you've just graduated high school, just graduated college, don't be afraid, because most of the people who are in those roles were exactly where you're at. And if you are just graduating high school, or if you know anybody who's starting to look for a job, tell them, be aware of student loans. They haunt you forever. They even haunt you past death sometimes. Any final questions? Because I know we are almost done. Yes?
Where do you recommend looking for specific jobs? Like, if you're working, if you want to check out if there's any job openings at Funimation, where would you?
Okay, I am going to start with Funimation real quick. One, they don't do remote work for their office staff. Two, since they're owned by Sony, they have changed up a lot of their stuff. The only reason I know this is I tried to apply for them a few years ago. That doesn't mean things haven't changed, but I would look on, if you're going to look for jobs for Funimation or any entertainment company, typically look on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is like the storage house, same with Indeed, for every job that has ever been posted anywhere. But know that those types of jobs at Funimation or Viz or Discotech or even Warner Brothers and Disney, those are going to be the most competitive jobs in the known universe, because everybody wants to work there. Everybody wants to work at the cool place that does the cool things that they like. And this is not to say don't try, but just be aware of it. The other thing I recommend is if you apply for a job that's been posted for more than 3 weeks, no, you're not going to get it. That just means they've had a lot of resumes and they're taking time. Apply for jobs that are just freshly posted if you can. Because the longer it's been out there in the ether, the more candidates they have and the less chance that you'll be visited, so to speak, by the resume gods. Any other questions? You haven't asked a question yet. What's your question?
My question is ZipRecruiter, and I forget the other websites. Should we go through those?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not saying don't go through those, but ZipRecruiter doesn't always get all of the postings. So definitely do ZipRecruiter, Career Builder, Monster, LinkedIn, Indeed. I avoid Craigslist like the plague. Unless you want to work as a stripper, and I do have friends who do that, and it's a fine career, but not for everyone. But definitely go through those sites. However, you want to make sure if you're going to post your resume on there, do it in a PDF version, because that's going to be the most readable. You You don't want to do it in Word because it can screw with the formatting. And you want to make sure that you get your resume perfect because they're going to look at it and they're going to be critical. The other thing to think about is how many people have different versions of their resume? For every job you apply for?
I have a master resume at home.
So that's one rule of thumb. You want to cultivate your resume based on the job you're applying for. Now, I'm going to ask a silly question. I do apologize, but this is going to be helpful. I know our panel is just about done, so bear with me. How many people identify as male in this room? How many of you have applied for a job even though you see no qualities that match what you're looking for? So, the reason I ask that is because those who identify as male versus those who identify as female or they, them, tend to apply 95% of the time to a job they do not qualify for. So be careful when you're reading the job description and what's called the basic qualifications of what they're looking for, because you want to make sure that you match it. And I say that because those that identify as they, them, actually are more hesitant on applying for jobs because they feel they won't qualify for anything. And you want to be conscientious of what you do, but you don't want to be afraid of it. Women, or those who identify as female, actually apply to jobs that they're not qualified to 50% of the time. So it shows how kind of identifications actually help to translate to who is actually comfortable with those different things. So with that said, be careful of how you apply. Don't be afraid to how you apply, but make sure you identify your resumes as how you want to. And also make sure if you do identify as female, male, or they, them, that if you fear that somebody won't address you appropriately, make sure to identify that in your resume as well. Kind of next to your name, put they, them, he, him, she, her. Yes?
I'm non-binary. I currently identify as male, but I basically switch between, I'm basically male half the year and female the other half.
So that's a great point. If you are non-binary or if you're gender neutral or gender fluid, definitely make sure to identify as a gender that, or as how you, not a gender, how you want to identify somebody to call you. So if you have a name like Bob, let's say, or Sam, well, Bob's probably a terrible example, Sam, or even my name, Kelly, I have to identify how I will respond because I have a name that can go for any identification.
Are you saying that a person named Bob can't?
Maybe they can, I don't know. I don't want to be rude, but Sam is another name that typically you've seen any which way, so you have to be conscientious of that. And most organizations are now asking everybody's pronouns. And my brain is not working any longer, so I can't figure out what the word is. Yes?
So, I know you kind of told us what to look for and what employers look for in candidates.
And if anybody wants a card before they leave, please go ahead and get one.
But what would you recommend us looking for employers to see if they're a bad company to work for?
So it depends on what you are looking for. So if you're looking for something that's engineering related, I say that because it's the easy one. Or if you're looking for something office related, secretarial, look for a job that's going to match what you're looking for. Also look for an employer that's going to have some similar values to what you have. And that's a hard one with resume writing or job hunting, because that is in the eye of the beholder. And everybody has a different preference of what they're looking